All right, so for this problem, we're going to be working on credit cards and credit card interest and what do we actually owe after someone has had a credit card month of transactions, as is shown here in kind of this table 3. And so how do we actually calculate credit card interest? It's an interesting question. And what we actually do is we actually use simple interest to calculate credit card interest. We use I equals PRT. And so it's a formula that we're fairly familiar with and that we've used before. But there's always a twist, right? There's always something different. And in this case, there's actually 2 twists. The rate that we're given here. If you notice something at the beginning of the semester, I told you all interest rates are yearly unless I tell you otherwise. And so I'm kind of making a big deal around that one word that changes everything. This is a monthly interest rate, not yearly interest rate. And that's one of the tricks of credit cards is that they're trying to advertise as a monthly interest rate instead of a yearly interest rate, which can trip you up if you don't understand the difference, if you don't know the difference. So in this case, I've got a monthly interest rate. My R equals 0.012 for my ratio, and that is a monthly rate. Now, my time, though, is 1 month. So it kind of all works out, right? Because my T becomes a 1. My R is that thing. And so since my T is 1 month, I almost don't even need to write the T there because it's kind of principal times rate because it's understood that this credit card interest is calculated based on the month. And so it makes the math actually simpler. We just have to understand what the difference is so that we do the math right. The real trick, and the thing that makes this calculation actually fairly difficult to do correctly, is this principal, because there's not an easy value for principal for our monthly interest. And so what most credit card companies use is they use something called the average daily balance. And the average daily balance, that's what they use for principal there. And that is basically the amount of money that I owed per day. And then it's the average amount of money that I owed per day. And so what it would be like principal from day 1 plus principal from day 2 plus principal from day 3 plus ... And this is June, so it's a 30-day month, plus principal from day 30 divided by 30 would give me the average principal that I owed per day for the month. That's the calculation that's going to take all of our time. And it's not going to look just like what I wrote up here because we're actually going to end up doing some multiplication because our principal for day 1, well, in this case, our principal for the first 6 days here is the same, right? It's the previous balance. And so we actually end up using the same value. And so our P1 through P6 would be the same. And so it'd be a little ridiculous to write that out. And so what it would be is it'd be the value times 6, because that'd be the same thing as adding those 6 days together. And so we're going to end up doing a bunch of find a value and then multiply by the number of days that it held that value. And so what we've got to do is we've got to start digging into this table to find this average daily balance. We've got to start digging into this table and figuring out how long we owed each amount. Now, your textbook actually kind of glosses over a fairly important point. And the assumption that we're left to make, the assumption that we have to make, is that all of these values, the credits, the payments, all of these things that happen, they have to happen at the beginning of our day for the math to work out. And so we're going to have to assume that $1,000 credit happens at the very beginning of June 6th. or that gas charge of $36.25 happens at the very beginning of June 8th. Otherwise, the math is not going to work out the same way that our textbook's math works out. Okay. Well, kind of given those sets of ideas, let's come up with an average daily balance for this transaction history. And so we start out owing. So we kind of start the month owing this $2,653.48. And so that would start on June 1st. And that's going to go on through June 6th. And on June 6th, we make a payment. And that payment is $1,000. And so kind of for June 1st through the beginning of June 6th, we owe that $2653.48. Now, once we've made that payment, now we only owe $1653.48, right? Because we paid $1,000 in. But for the first 5 days of the month, right? So for the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th, we owed the $2653, and then we're assuming on the beginning of the 6th we paid in $1,000. And so the way that'll work out is we can just say 6 minus 1 gives me 5 days that I owed that $2653. And so what I need from that is 5 times $2653.48, and that's that 5 days contribution to the average daily balance. And so down here I'm going to start writing out my average daily balance. So average daily balance calculation, and that's going to be 5 times my $2653.48, and then that'll be plus the next bit that we calculate here. All right, now from the 6th on down to the 8th, right? So something new happens on the 8th, and that's going to be a charge. And we're going to call that gas. We really don't care what it was for, so I'm really not going to record what the charge was for. All we care is that money went out, and that $36.25 went out. $1,000 went out. $36.25 went out. And so I have my $1653.48, and then I'm going to add to that another $36.25 because another $36.25 went out, and so my new amount owed is going to be $1689.73. All right, so the $1653.48, I owed that for 2 days, right? Because I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that 8 minus 6. That's going to give me, I owed that for 2 days. So 2 days times the $1653.48. And so down here I'm going to say plus 2 times $1653.48. All right. Now, from here, I keep going. Well, actually, almost immediately. On the 9th, I have another charge. And it was groceries, but I don't really care what it was for because all I'm really calculating are values. So $138.43 went out. And so really, I only owed, so I do my 9 minus 8 gives me a 1 day. And so for 1 day, I owed the $1689.73. And so you don't even need to write in the 1 times. I'm going to put it in just as a placeholder to show that we know what we're doing. So then this is going to be plus, and then 1 times my 1689.73. Okay. Excuse me. So now I've got to add that 138.43. So I'm going to do plus 138. Plus, okay, I thought it would do that. 1689.73. plus 138.43. Add those together, and I get that we now owe, 1828.16. That's 1828. I like to make things somewhat readable. 16. All right, and so now I'm going to go on and I'm going to get down to the 17th, 6/17. And on the 17th, I've got two charges. So I've got charges, and that's going to be 42.36 and 127.19. And what's that mean? That means that for 17 minus 9, which will be 8 days, right? 17 minus 9 is going to give me 8 days. And so for 8 days, I owed my 1828.16. So over here, I had my plus 8 times 1828.16. All right, let's go ahead and put plus down here because I know I'm not done. Let's keep going. I told you this was tedious, right? All right, so now I'm going to take that 1828.16 that I currently owe, so 1828.16. I'm going to add to that 42.36, and I'm going to add to that 127.19. All of a sudden, I know that I owe 1997.21. And then goes down from the 17th to the 27th. And so I owe that for 10 days, right? So I have the 27th minus the 17th is going to give me 10 days, and that 10 days is going to be times my 1997.21. And so over here, I'm going to write in my 10 days times 1997.21. Okay. And then this is where it gets a little bit tricky. This is where we have to think for a second. There's another charge here, so I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. So we have another charge, and this goes as we expected to. We got the 214.83 for the charge, and so I have my 1997.71. I'm going to add 214.83, and that's going to give me 212.54 is what I owe now. So I now owe 22.54. And then I owe that through the end of the month. Now, up until this point, I've been doing, and so it would be very reasonable for me to write down 30 minus 27 and say that equals 3. There's only one problem. What did I say at the very beginning? I said we're assuming that this date, that whatever happens here, happened at the beginning of the date that we wrote. Well, at the end of the month, nothing has happened. We're just needing to get to the end of the month. And so at the end of the month, we need to get to the end of the day, not the beginning of the day. And so for the very end of the month, and only the end of the month, we take that 30 minus 27, and then we add 1 to it before we multiply by the value, the 22.1. Well, wait a minute. Yeah. On the 27th, we had another charge. Yeah. I'm writing in the wrong place. That's going to be the 30 minus 27 plus 1. And that 1 is for the beginning of the 30th through the end of the day of the 30th. And so that's for our last day of the month. And so you can get there from saying the 27th through the 30th is the 27th, the 28th, the 29th, and the 30th. And so since we said that that charge went through on the very beginning of the 27th to get all the way to the end of the 30th is 4 days. Earlier, we'd been going from the beginning of the 30th, and so that's why the 30 minus 27 would give us 3 days, or why back here the 17 minus 9 would give us our 8 days. And so the difference here is we have to get all the way to the end of the month, and so we have to include that last day. All right, and so then that's going to become 4 times my 2212. I don't know why I'm having trouble writing that down. 221254. Okay, well, then I'm going to do plus 4 times 2212.54. And then that whole sum, after I do that whole sum, that'll be over my 30-day month. Now, if I did that right, these coefficients, that 5 plus that 2 plus that 1 plus that 8 plus that 10 plus that 4 will equal 30, right? And so we do 5 plus 2 is 7, plus 1 is 8, plus 4 is 6, or plus 8 is 16. 16 plus 10 is 26. Then plus 4 gives me my 30. And so I did do that right, but it's always nice to go back and check and make sure that these things are adding up to be correct. All right, so now let's type all that in. So I'm going to do 5 times my 2653.48. I'm going to add to that 2 times my 1653.48. Then I'm going to add to that my 1 times. I really don't need to type that in. I'm just doing it to show that we're holding this value for 1 day. 1689.73. Then plus 8 times my 1828.16. I said the 2. I hit the screen for the 2, and the 2 didn't get put in. So I always read as you're typing 2. So 1828.16, and plus 10 times 1997.21. That feels like a date, and that date does not feel like it should be nearly 30 years ago. Plus 4 times 2212.54. All right, I hit enter here, and then I divide that by 30, and I get that my average daily balance here, average daily balance is 2,057.05. And that was part A of my problem, was to find my average daily balance. Now, I always like to think, is that a reasonable answer? Because anytime I get a number out of a calculator, that there could be typos. I could have, not caught that I didn't put that 2 in there. I could have accidentally multiplied, by some random factor. My fingers could have hit the wrong button. Anything could have happened. And so when I look at this, I have values that are kind of ranging between 1,500 and 3,000. And I'm trying to find an average value for days values that range kind of between 1,500 and 3,000. And so just over 2,000 seems very reasonable. I'm not saying that I know that it's right. I'm just saying that it seems like a reasonable value. Okay. Well, the next question was how much interest needs to be paid on July 1st. Well, I said that was my simple interest, right? My simple interest, that was my interest equals principal times rate times time. And my interest rate was my interest rate was monthly, and it was 0.012. So that's my monthly rate. My T equals 1 month. And for credit cards, the billing will always be on a 1 month cycle. And then my principal is that average daily cents. So when I put all that together, I'm going to get that my interest owed for the month is that $2,057.05 times my 0.012 times 1 month. And again, I don't really need to write that 1 month, but because I'm kind of showing you the placeholder, I'm kind of doing this as an example, I'm putting it in as the placeholder. All right, so 2057.05, and that's going to be multiplied by 0.012, and that's going to give me $24.68. So $24.68 in interest. That was part C, or part B. Okay. Part C says find the balance due on July 1st. And so the balance due on July 1st, it's a C there. Well, what it'll be due? It'll be due what I owed. So what I owed at end of month. And then added to that will be interest accumulated over the month. So interest from month. It's an M, even though it doesn't look like an M. Well, what did I owe at the end of all this? At the end of all this, I owed the 22,1254, 2,212.54. And so that would equal that. And so this is going to equal my 2,212.54. And then that'll be plus my 24.68. And so what I actually owe, or what I actually need to pay in, so what's due on the 7th is 2212.54 plus 24.68. And I'll get 2237.22. And so that's my part C. That's what's actually due on the 1st. And then the last question gets very, very interesting. It says they require a $30 minimum monthly payment if the balance due at the end of the billing period is under $400. They say if it's more than $400, then it's going to be 1/25 of the balance due at the end of the billing period. Okay, well, last I checked, $2,200 was more than $400. I may not be very good at math, but I know that 2,000 is more than 400. So what do I need? I need to use that 1/25 of the balance due. Remember, I've talked about translating, and we can kind of take this as, the English version of what needs to be done. And I said that, so I have 1/25, and I said of translates into multiplication, and so it'll be 1/25 of my balance. And rather than just say balance, let's just say 1/25 of what's due. Well, we just calculated what was due, and so literally it's just going to be, let's find out what's 1/25 of 1/25 times that value. And so I'll go back to green here. And so I'll say minimum payment is going to equal 1/25 times 2237.22. So 1/25 times 2237.22. That's going to give me 89.49. $89.49. And so I owe $2,200. My minimum payment is less than $100, Oh, and by the way, $25 of that is going straight to interest and not being paid towards the 2200 or the, the principal, the 2212 that was due at the end of the month. Well, what's that mean? That means that this thing, it's going to be very difficult for me to pay this off if I stick with these minimum payments, because I'm paying very, very little towards the actual balance, the actual principal of what's owed. I'd have to spend less than like $60 a month for me to actually make progress towards paying this down if I'm paying minimum payments the way this is set up. So minimum payments are not a good plan if you actually are trying to pay off the value of the credit card. All right, that's a good example of how do we actually calculate the interest owed for a credit card bill. Hope that helps us as we go through the homework.